Hi, it's me, Ingrid INFP, and I'm going to talk about the Sally Ann experiment, or the Sally Ann test. And it's been used to say that the autistic children don't have theory of mind. And I will tell you how I, as a 30-year-old autistic woman, almost 30-year-old, got this wrong. I got it wrong, and I'm a doctor, okay? And I will explain why I got it wrong and why it doesn't mean that I am dumb or that I lack theory of mind. And that's how this experiment is flawed in my eyes. Now, I did not get the actual experiment done on me as a 4-year-old kid, okay? I got it told to me while I wasn't really paying attention. And you have to be paying attention in order to actually really understand the parameters of this test. So basically, and yeah, also I blurted out what I thought was the answer in front of a bunch of other autistic people. And I realized that a lot of autistic people were on the same page as me, and some of them were like, no, obviously not, that this is the answer. And they actually got the right answer, and I got the wrong one. Anyway, so I don't remember the entire story, so I probably will make you guys wrong as well by giving you not the whole story. Children will receive an actual visualization of the situation. You can go and look it up on Wikipedia to see the actual picture version of the story. Basically, you are Sally, basically, and Anne is this other child that you're supposed to determine the actions of. And basically, you have a basket and you have a box, and you watch Anne put her marble into the basket, and then Anne leaves the room and goes away for a walk or something. And while Anne is away, you see how the researchers are changing the placement of the marble from the basket to the box. And then Anne comes back, and you are asked, where will Anne look next for her marble? And I will allow you a few seconds to reply to that question. So basically, will Anne choose the basket or the box? It doesn't matter where the marble is. Where will she look for the marble first? And the answer is in the basket, because that is where she put it before she left. I must have not listened correctly to the entirety of the situation, because I said, well, it's kind of 50-50 if she chooses the basket or the box. And that is the wrong answer, right? Because Anne has no idea that the marble could be placed anywhere else but the basket where she left it last. So the most logical option is to choose where Anne has last seen the marble, which is in the basket, and not in the box where it actually is. Now, it assumes a lot of things, okay? And I thought that Anne was aware of the fact that she was in an experiment, kind of. And so I told this whole story to my neurotypical best friend. And for him, it was like, why would you choose anything but the basket, which is the correct answer? And I was like, well, like, hear me out. Hear me out. Why I would choose such a dumb answer, that makes no sense to anybody who hasn't been through my exact process in my brain. First of all, I did not hear the entire setup. I did not actually see Sally and Anne in a room. I am not called Sally, so why would I be Sally? Okay, so all of that is just like extra stuff to make you extra confused in my mind. Anyway, I'm not even sure that I remember the names of who the whole thing. I'm not recounting it properly because I would have to like say the exact words that the examiners would say to these children, and I don't have access to that exact script. But basically, in my mind, Anne is aware that the examiner could move the marble at any time because this is a test experiment situation. Maybe she doesn't trust Sally, who, could move her marble at any time. Why didn't Anne take the marble with her if that's what she wanted to, like, if that's what she was going to look for? Why wouldn't Anne, who goes off and does not find the marble in the basket, like the basket is open as well, so like wouldn't you see the marble in the basket? Would you actually have to look inside the basket? Or would you ask Sally, who's been sitting there this whole time, and say, what happened to my marble? And then Sally could say, oh, well, your marble has been moved to the box because we're in a test situation, I guess that a 4-year-old self would actually answer more correctly than my 30-year-old self because I'm overthinking all of this. But like, my 4-year-old self would probably like, yeah, she'll check into the basket. But because I know that in a test experiment that things can happen that are outside of my control, I would assume, if I didn't see the marble like lying where I left it last, I would look into the box. I also thought that when Anne came back into the room, that she was asked, oh, where is your marble? And then Anne would think, oh, so I'm being tested now about where I think that the marble could be. Which does change the parameters a little bit, because it makes Anne think like, oh, wait, what would my logical answer of where the marble would be? Rather than Anne just coming back and like automatically looking to where she looked, where her marble was last, So, and I realize that this is an example of what scientists would call bottom-up thinking, okay? And so I think that this is more of a test of literal thinking and bottom-up thinking rather than theory of mind. Because I'm not assuming what Anne would imagine. But what I'm doing is that I'm wondering about, I'm saying like it depends on so many parameters that we do not know about because we're only told a certain amount of information. And I find that neurotypicals are more inclined towards assumption of saying like, okay, so I've seen this kind of situation before, and applying the same blanket statement to every single situation that is like that, which is generalization, I guess. well, I think that autistic brains are a lot more focused on the details of what is going on rather than the big picture. And so, yes, the simple answer is the basket. But in my mind, it's much more complicated than that. Because in my mind, like, Anne knows that she might be manipulated. Anne knows, maybe another examiner has told Anne before she went into the room about the fact that her marble could have been moved at any time. You know, I thought that Anne was given the same information that I was given. And that isn't lack of theory of mind. That is just me wishing for the best for my friend here who has left the room and is not given enough information to make a good decision, you know? And I think that if I was in the actual testing situation, I would have to ask the examiner, oh, did you tell her about the fact that her marble could be moved? And obviously I wouldn't be able to ask any of those questions because they were just expecting a black and white answer. Is it in the basket or in the box? And I wouldn't be able to ask those questions. But those questions do matter because it would change the answer, you know? And just saying that I'm overthinking it, I'm thinking too much, I'm not, you know, it's not such a complicated question. It is a complicated question because if there's a little thing that is tweaked, then the answer will be completely different, you know? And so, yes, I am frustrated at the fact that I got a question that 4-year-olds are supposed to answer wrong. But yeah, so in my mind, the person who left the room was maybe given some sort of clue in that this is a test situation and that she is maybe asked, like, okay, so we are able to change the placement of your marble. Where would you look first? Maybe she's asked that question before she enters the room again, you know? Because in real life, she wouldn't have to go look into the basket because the basket is open, and so you would see the marble if it was there. And also, in a real life situation, like, Anne would know that this is not a normal playroom with the marble, you know? She knows that the examiner is sitting right there. Unless you have like a two-way mirror or something, you know? And also she's being observed by this other girl. I mean, it's it's silly, and I am angry at myself for confirming in this stupid experiment. But like, I think that this experiment was made by neurotypical researchers that have no idea how autism actually works. And sure, theory of mind could apply, maybe, but it's not the reason that I answered this question wrong. Because, like, yes, I can put myself into Anne's situation if I know that Anne, you know, is completely unaware of the entire situation. Then sure, she would look into the basket. But nowhere in the experiment is it told that she is completely unaware of the situation. And so neurotypicals will jump to the conclusion that, like, okay, well, since she is, that they will guess that she is completely unaware because she left the room and she came back, and that's the simplest solution. But it's not obvious, you know? It's not obvious. So yeah, look up the Salian test. I probably recounted it wrong, which also confirms that maybe my working memory is the reason why I didn't completely grasp all of the details of the situation. But I have this inkling that maybe neurotypical people just don't need all of that information in order to come to the right and assumed answer, you know, because they'll just think in the way that these researchers want you to think, you know, because of the double empathy problem, you know, of like neurotypicals understanding what neurotypicals are trying to get at, while the autistic people are not understanding what the neurotypical, the autistic people are not understanding exactly what the neurotypical people, the examiners, are wanting to get at. So yeah, I'm probably the only one who got this wrong. There was this other person in that group that said that she liked that reasoning, and so she thought that it seemed right. But I know that the other people in the group were like, no, of course she'll look into the basket. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I guess that it depends on what details you like grabbed your attention. I guess that I got so lost in all the other details that I kind of lost track of like what makes most sense that they want us to answer. But yeah, there was somebody in my comment section who was on my INTP/INFP video, and they were talking about the misunderstanding that they had. And the misunderstanding I realized was like, wow, this is so autistic. And the person hadn't even, this was a video from a long time ago, and this was before I knew that I was autistic. And I made that video, and then I understood that this person, then I wrote back, I said, I think that you might want to look into autism. And he said, oh, actually, I am diagnosed autistic. Good catch. Because basically it was literal thinking and bottom-up thinking that he was talking about. And I've been reading The Autistic Guide to Self-Discovery by Sol Smith, and there was this one example of like how talking about a lost cat, and then like I forget what the example was, but the example was something like, okay, so you see a cat on the street, like do you pet it? And like a neurotypical person would be like, yes, of course. But like the autistic person will have all of these like extra things to think about, like, oh, what kind of cat are we talking about? You know, are we talking about a wild cat, or are we talking about a domesticated cat? Are we talking about a cat that has a color? Is the cat, you know, acting diseased in some way? Is the cat a cat that I have seen before in my neighborhood? You know, there's like 10,000 different variables, and you're not supposed to think that deep about it. You're just supposed to like think about that like a classic cat on the street, whatever street it is, just like a very abstract, not literal, and very like it's based on a lot of assumptions. Well, I think the autistic brains like really crave the details in order to actually make like a very logical conclusion of all of the separate data pieces. And unfortunately, the world does not work that way because there's so much to take in all the time. And so that's what makes neurotypical brains work so well in the system and the world that we have around us, is that they just synthesize everything and just like assume a certain thing without needing to go into like 10,000 details. So they can be really quick and succinct, while autistic people are there and like coming up with 10,000 different things that could be, that aren't really, and in a way that is more abstract than the practical, down to earth way that's a neurotypical will answer to that question. So yeah, I'm trying to understand bottom-up thinking compared, because in the MBTI I'm an INFP, so technically I should be looking at the bigger picture and not be looking at the details according to that personality type thingy. But I'm realizing more and more that, okay, actually I am getting into the details and not going into like I am going into the big picture, but it's just a different way of seeing the big picture than a neurotypical person would see it, And so that's why I can get very stuck on certain things, and it's not always bad. Sometimes somebody needs to actually talk about this thing that is, essential to the project or whatever. But yeah, it does put us into kind of embarrassing, silly situations. So let me just see if I can find that passage. So I'm looking at some notes I took from the Autistic Guide to Self-Discovery. I wrote, bottom-up thinking is like seeing each detail as new. It doesn't rely on inflexible conclusions. It is a gift of lateral thinking. Chairness, so basically the quality of being a chair, is a matter of agreement, not on objective reality. Do we call an origami chair a chair? Is a yoga ball the same as an airline chair? And so that's how autistic people can be very creative, in that we will see like a cup, and then we'll be like, well, what makes a cup a cup? Would we call this a cup? No, well, really, it should actually be called a mug, right? But what makes a mug different from a cup? And so it has a handle, but not all mugs have handles. Is it because it's made out of ceramics? Well, no, because certain mugs are made out of glass. But it all depends on your definition of a mug, and I mean, like, would this qualify as one mug of tea? Because this mug is so big compared to like a smaller mug of tea. Why do we call it a cup of tea and not a mug of tea when it's mostly served in a mug? Why is mug more confined to coffee drinking rather than tea? I mean, like, I'm just, spidering off into all of this. Well, a neurotypical brain is like just going directly to the shortcut of, okay, well, this is what most people consider to be a mug or a cup. They're not going to be wasting brain cell energy and discussing how this is a mug or not. They might do it at times because it's fun, but their brain doesn't automatically go there every time that they have to go and get a mug from the shelf at work. My mind is always going to that. Like, it's this constant just chatter in your head of all sorts of different things, and it does make us think deeply about the world. But it's also it's also a lot to deal with on a day-to-day basis because it makes simple things complicated, you know? That's why it's so hard for me to, for example, drive a car. It's like I'm looking at all of these different details, and it's hard for me to prioritize and to figure out, like, okay, what do I need to do now? I need to brake, you know? And then, like, it's hard also for me to know, like, well, we're supposed to all follow the rules, right? And I'm like, no, but a lot of people don't follow the rules. But the rules that they don't follow are not the ones that I consider important. Like, some of the rules that a lot of people follow are the ones that I don't consider as important. And then the rules that people don't follow are the ones that I consider important. And so, like, what I consider important is different. And that's how it is with everything. And so it is quite alienating to live in a world where, like, my sense of logic and prioritization and everything about how I see the world is just different from others and therefore considered wrong. And maybe it is logically wrong, but a lot of things that neurotypical people consider logically correct is actually not correct. So I feel like I'm not given any benefit of the doubt compared to all these neurotypical people who are, because they're just more prevalent, you know, and the whole system is based on how they see things. So yeah, that was a long video to just talk about a single topic. But tell me what you guys think. It's taken me a while to really wrap my head around what bottom-up thinking is, because it's so stereotypically and, you know, it's described by people who do not do bottom-up thinking. So that's why it doesn't really reflect how I see it. But I'm getting closer to understanding it, I think. So yeah, tell me what you guys think. Have a great day.